and this is Rebel Dharma, Wednesday night. Glad you guys are here. Those of you in the room, those of you on the Zoom. We teach Buddhism here, and we practice meditation. Two things that it's the same thing, actually, I guess, meditation. Although I guess some people are into meditation that isn't Buddhist in nature. There are many forms of meditation, but we primarily focus on, what I focus on is Buddhism from a kind of psychological perspective. So I try to blend even my training in Western psychology and Buddhist psychology or Eastern philosophy. So glad you're here. Anyone here for the first time that wants to introduce themselves, either on Zoom or in the room? No. All right, well, welcome anyway. So we're going to meditate for a period of time, 30 minutes. I just realized that sometimes I do that. Sometimes I say, we're going to meditate for a period of time. And when I was new to meditation, if somebody said, we're going to meditate just for an undisclosed period of time, I would be freaking out the whole time. So we're going to meditate for 30 minutes. So I will ring a bell, and then I will eventually ring a bell and it'll be over. So you can rest assured, you don't have to pay attention to time or, anything like that. I'll take care of that. And then, we'll see. I'll open up for some questions, any questions about meditation practice or Buddhism in general. And then I have a bit of a topic that we could get into if need be. Otherwise, I'm happy to just kind of do a kind of a back and forth. All right. But for the first little while, let's go ahead and find a posture that's workable, that's sustainable. We're going to meditate. And meditation, this mindfulness meditation is really about remembering. It's remembering to come back, to bring the attention back to this present time experience over and over and over again, knowing that your mind will wander off, knowing that you'll be distracted, knowing that random thoughts will come. And then when you recognize that happens, that's like meditation in progress. That's what's happening. That's part of the process. So just to kind of know that and be clear about that for yourself. All right, so if you haven't already allowed the eyes to close, you can feel free to close your eyes, or you can allow them to be downcast. And just arriving here, settling in the room. Opening to the comings and goings of sounds outside the room. Sounds inside the room. And if you can, just allowing sound to be in the background of your attention. We're not trying to keep it away. We're not trying to do anything special. Just allowing the comings and goings of sound. as the attention will naturally rest on the experience of breathing. We're going to be somewhat intentional about the attention to the breath. It's useful to pick a point, tip of the nose or rise and fall of the belly. And allow that to be the place you return to when inevitably the mind wanders off. Breathing in, know that you're breathing in. Breathing out, know that you're breathing out. In the same way that we have a soft focus on sounds arising and passing, same is true with thoughts. Thoughts are present. We're not trying to get rid of thinking. We're just allowing thoughts to be in the background of our attention. Same thing can be true with physical sensations, arising, passing, changing. It's happening. We're not avoiding what's present. Instead, we're choosing to aim the attention specifically on this experience of breathing and allow that to be the focal point. Again and again, just recognizing if the attention wanders off. And with a sense of friendliness or kindness with the mind, aiming the attention back, breathing in, breathing out. again and again, recognizing when the attention wanders off, and with that sense of friendliness or kindness with the mind, aiming the attention back. Here, this breath, this sitting, breathing body, After some time, establishing some mindfulness of the in and out breath, we can begin to soften the edges of our attention, or you might say broaden the awareness to the experience of the body breathing. Also, if there are mental formations and thoughts and stories, when we recognize them, just noting, is the thought or story some fantasy or craving? Was it some resentment? Is there some felt sense of pleasant or unpleasant? It's beginning to really expanding from the breath into the full organism of this body, this mind, this present time experience. Are the sounds pleasant or unpleasant, neutral? Thoughts, feelings, sensations? The invitation is to do this in a open way, not to be critical or judgmental or even too analytical. Really the felt sense, experience of the ear receiving sound, or the mind thinking. Of course, all the while allowing the majority of the attention to stay with the breath. Say 80% attention on the experience of breathing, another 20% on the other faculties. relaxing into each new breath, observing what arises in the heart and the mind, and allowing whatever arises to stay for a time and pass away, as all things do. Relax, observe, allow. Feel free to move the body any way you feel like you need to or want to. Any questions? Any things you're wondering about meditation wise, instruction wise, Buddhism in general? All right. Well, we'll open back up for maybe questions later on. So I've been thinking last few weeks, I've been thinking about a group of teachings known as the hindrances, and another group of teachings that I feel, and maybe only one other place in Buddhism have I really, or in the, the suttas, the teachings, have I found these two groups of teachings paired. And but it's always been helpful for me. So I'm going to try to cover both of them, but mainly I'm just going to focus on the hindrances. And I kind of want to, my lead in is just to talk about a story found within the Buddhist teaching known as the ancient city. So the Buddha was describing basically the kind of path to enlightenment. And he said, it's as if I rediscovered an ancient city that had been overgrown by, the forest, by the earth, something like, well, what this reminds me of is I've been to a couple places in the world where there were these ancient kind of citadels or cities, and you see this all over the planet, right? Where in Indonesia, in a place called Yogyakarta, there's a temple there called Borobudur. And Borobudur was literally one of the largest Buddhist temples outside of India. And another place is called Angkor Wat. Angkor Wat is in Cambodia. And I've been to both of these places. And this story that the Buddha is telling reminds me of these places that were once beautiful, vibrant, cities and dynasties, and Borobudur specifically was the center of a larger, kind of civilization that was in the area, and that, and then it was extinct. Actually, was really next to the Krakatoa volcano, right? So there was a lot of volcanic eruptions, and then the jungle growing in over the centuries. And so the Buddha is describing this ancient city that he rediscovered, and imagining that we once lived in this city, and this city was inhabited with people who were happy and content and felt fulfilled in their life. There was enough. They felt enough. They felt good enough. They felt worthy. They all, everyone was taking care of each other in this ancient city. And that this practice is a path to this city. Now, what happened is that over time, generations and, life happens. Basically, the city was overrun or overgrown, and people died. One died, people moved away, and the forest around this ancient city became hard to travel, and so it wasn't rediscovered by new passers. And so the Buddha, in some direction, discovered this path and then began to kind of forge his way to this ancient city. Now, this is a bit of a metaphor, right? The ancient city is found in our own hearts and minds. It's this precious dwelling place that the Buddha describes as nibbana or nirvana, freedom from suffering. And the path, which this is the thing that one of the many things that I just love about the Buddha, that the Buddha wasn't like, I created this thing. The Buddha was like the historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, basically said, I rediscovered the Dharma. The Dharma has always been, and it had fallen out of practice. And he rediscovered it through his own practice, through his own effort, through teachers that he, trained with, that taught him various concentration practices, that taught him various yogic practices, the kind of philosophy of the time. And then he took that information and then he narrowed it into what he then calls the path, right? The middle path. So in order to kind of cut through, so I'm thinking kind of Indiana Jones, cutting through the jungle, right? Trying to find the path. There are certain tools we need. And the Buddha called these the 5 faculties. These are what we need to succeed along the path and to reach our own treasure, right? And so those are confidence, effort or energy. Confidence also sometimes is talked about as faith. And I'll say more about that later. But confidence, faith, inspiration is another way it's talked about. And then effort or energy. So sustaining effort or learning to utilize your energy in a positive way or towards the goal. Mindful awareness, so mindfulness. Concentration and wisdom. So these are considered the 5 faculties, or sometimes they're called the 5 powers. And the idea, I see them as tools. They're the tools that we need in order to really sustain this practice, in order to cut through the difficulties that we will face, right? I'm pretty sure everyone in this room has experienced some difficulties in your life. From the Buddhist perspective, no one gets out unscathed. This is the realm of existence that we're in. This is where there is pain, there is difficulty, there is challenges. Just being born is difficult. And then, that's the start. Maybe actually for some, maybe actually being in the womb is difficult. So there's pain and difficulty that we're going to experience. And there's some kind of a delusion that we've totally perpetuated in our culture and in this world, in this age, that that's not supposed to be. That we're not supposed to have difficulties. And it's just a delusion. It's not a reality. It's never been a reality. And so this is one of the ways that the Buddha, is talking about. There is a way that we can change. It's not that pain is going to stop, but we can change our view of what we're experiencing in our life. And some of the things we need in order to do that are faith and effort and mindfulness and concentration and wisdom, which are, some steps along what's called the Eightfold Path. So these 5 tools are the kind of starting point. And then the hope is that we're developing them. I think of kind of like Batman with his all these little gadgets, right? He's got his mindfulness and his concentration. He's got his effort, his energy. He's got his wisdom all on his, nifty little tool belt. He's got to continue to utilize these skills and, maybe gain some more skills. And some of the things that get in the way, or what we call the hindrances, are the obstacles that we all face along the path. Now, from our birth date to our death date, there's going to be difficulty. A lot of us try to deny that, avoid it, distract from it, bury our heads, drink it away. But did that really work? Didn't work for me. It worked for a little while, would numb out. If I smoked enough weed or drank enough booze, I would kind of numb out just enough, like lower the volume just enough. But it never really worked the way that I wanted it to, ultimately just causing more anguish, more difficulty, more challenges. So this is the first of the hindrances that the Buddha talked about. What are some of the hindrances to our own peace and ease that we're going to experience in this life? The first is craving, wanting, desire, pleasure seeking. From the kind of Buddhist psychological perspective, this is what in the temperament of the greed type, right? All of the 5 hindrances, and I'll just go through them. It's craving, aversion, sleepiness or drowsiness, restlessness or agitation, and then doubt or disbelief. These are considered the 5 hindrances. And I'll get in more detail about each of them. But they are basically strategies that we try to adopt, or that, just kind of naturally arise as we're trying to navigate this stuff. So pleasure seeking, or greed, or craving, or wanting things to be other than they are. Sometimes reality is really fucking difficult to accept. And so, like I was just describing, seeking pleasure, seeking some type of way to either numb or dull pain, or just our reality of life, can seem like a good idea, Definitely felt that. It sounded like a good idea for a long time. Maybe you guys have heard the terms, first it was fun, then it was fun with problems, and then it was just problems. Never just starts with problems. I mean, maybe for some people actually. Or, the first time I snuck my mom's booze or something, puked all over the house. It was a problem, but I didn't see it as a problem because there was the numb that took place, right? So this is, pleasure seeking as a strategy. and it becomes an obstacle. But we're so inundated with this kind of understanding of, well, if I just keep the pleasure coming, then I will stay off any type of pain or discomfort. Does anyone else have that strategy, or was that just me? Yeah, show of hands. Talking to the right room, right? So then for another strategy is aversion, right? This is the opposite of, if I can keep pleasure coming, then I will avoid pain. This is, if I can keep anything negative out, then I will avoid pain. If I can keep any threat, any potential, threat is basically the best way to kind of think about it. Like if I just close off and push away any experience that is potentially threatening or unpleasant, then I'll be okay. Right. So that's another strategy. Yet another strategy is, so those are grouped, obviously, they're opposites, right? Pleasure seeking or aversion, they're grouped together in the 5 hindrances. And we all get caught in them, And it's not a problem if you do. Matter of fact, if you don't recognize that you're getting caught in them, that's the problem. Because this is what's great about meditation and about concentration and mindfulness and effort, is that it's this repeating practice of acceptance of the way things are, and then effort to shift our perception, to kind of let go of the strategies. But first we have to see them. This is why the first noble truth is suffering. Like if you can't fucking see the suffering, none of the rest of the shit that the Buddha was teaching is going to be helpful, because we're just clouded. There was one second. There's a teaching that the Buddha gave. One of the first teachings, he was talking about like he was getting ready to kind of go and try to like formulate a message. And he basically surveyed over the land with his mind, right? And all the people he'd come into contact with. And one of the things that he was saying to this group later, he said, I saw that there was, people had so much dust in their eyes that they were literally taking handfuls of dust or dirt and throwing them in their eyes to stay deluded, right? Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that I see how by description those first two you said are opposites, but it's funny because in my mind, like my own experience, I feel like they're very closely related to each other, because indulgence is the avoidance of reality.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I've had trouble separating where aversion and sort of,
Well, aversion is, it's, so there's the indulgence, which is just the pleasure seeking, right? The aversive type, just instead of pleasure seeking, there might be some pleasure seeking involved, but they're really more around kind of status quo. Like I want to keep the status quo. And I've talked about this before. I was working with someone some years ago, and they said at 7 years old, their dad walked out on them, and they decided no more people. They were in so much pain. They were so abandoned that they closed off, literally. And it was brilliant. I was like, that is a brilliant strategy for a 7-year-old. No more people. This is way too painful. And if there's much more of this happening, I won't survive.
Yeah.
And so that's aversion, right? And so it's the opposite of, although very, very often they are connected, especially when it comes to addiction, right? We're both trying to keep the unpleasant away while grasping at that which, we think is going to make us happy, or at least dull the pain, right? Because the pain, as we all know, is fucking unavoidable. God, I hated that. I hated that. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how much weed I smoked, no matter how blackout drunk I got, when the hangover, subsided or the mushrooms wore off, there I was. Right. And you could just add in any of your addictive compulsive behaviors right into there where I said weed or booze, because that's the pleasure seeking mentality, right? It's never enough. Aversion also. So then, sleepiness, right? Drowsiness. This is an interesting strategy. Sleepiness or drowsiness is different than I'm tired because I didn't get enough sleep last night. It's more about I have a fog that comes over my head, or I dissociate from reality. I leave my body. I can't be connected to what's happening because it feels overwhelming. So sloth and torpor is a way of saying sluggishness, or another sinking mind is another way it's described. Sinking mind. Now, I had someone I was working with some time ago, and anytime that they would start to touch a certain story in their life, they would literally start to fall asleep, like right in front of me. They just their eyes would close, and they'd start to kind of draw, like during meditation sometimes. And when there's a whole burst of energy that can come, we'll start to feel a lull. You ever experience that just in meditation? Yeah, just in general. So that's a defense mechanism that the brain, the body has come up with. Maybe there's a psychological component to it, of course. Different than I didn't get enough sleep last night and I'm trying to meditate and I'm just going to fall asleep. I'm just tired, right? It's different than that. It's more of a mental phenomenon that takes place. Now, I just had another thought about that, but it's gone. Yeah. Well, there is, part of the defense mechanism of kind of becoming sleepy or drowsy, it's natural. And this is where the effort and energy comes into play, because one of the things that we need to do is, well, first of all, we have to, it's counterintuitive. When we close our eyes to meditate, what other times do we close our eyes? Mostly just to go to sleep, right? So you've been up for 8-10 hours, however long, depending on how, when you got up this morning, right? And then you close your eyes to meditate, and then your brain, you start to calm down a little bit, and there's a natural tendency to want to just go right to sleep. So we have to resist that. So some of the ways that we can do that is by utilizing concentration practice, which is a kind of a narrowed focus, or walking meditation, which is also concentration practice. Concentration, lifting, moving, placing, walking briskly, feeling the feet on the floor. Allowing your eyes to open. You can totally meditate with your eyes open. It can be a little distracting, but you can do it. Matter of fact, I started in the Zen practice, and in the Soto Zen, we would go to a room like this, and then everyone would face the wall. It was weird, but it was useful because then it was just a blank wall. And then I would kind of find a point, and I would just lightly kind of let my eye rest on it. And I wasn't distracted by everything that was around me. And I felt I was still a little bit freaked out because I would have my back to the door, which was always never an okay for me. But, they were okay. They were monks. So I gave them a pass. I didn't think they were going to hit me. Although, some kinds of Zen, they might. They usually ask for permission. Kind of like a dysfunctional relationship. So anyway, meditation, eyes open, focused on a single point. You can totally do that. You can do that right here. And you can just allow the eyes to drop, or even standing up when you're feeling sleepy. Nothing wrong with that. If you ever go on a meditation retreat, you'll see that there's rhythms. Sometimes you'll be more sleepy, sometimes you'll be more awake, knowing when to walk, do walking meditation, or exercise, or do something else to kind of activate the body, knowing when to calm it down. There's arousal factors, and then there's calming factors that are happening within meditation. So whether it's energy or effort, or whether it's concentration and mindfulness. So some of the thoughts about it. Any questions about what I've kind of been talking about so far? All right. Okay, so agitation, the opposite of sleepiness. So sleepiness is this down-regulating, protective fog, right? In psychology, sometimes we call it dissociation. The opposite is agitation, restlessness. What do we call that? What's the most common phrase that we use for that? Anxiety. Yes. This is, if I say super busy, super distracted, right? Then I will be able to avoid, or I'll also be, so it starts off as a strategy, and then it can be something that we just condition ourselves to be. So then you try to meditate, and what happens? Your mind is busy doing the 50,000 things it was trying to do all day or supposed to do all day, right? And so there's this distraction that takes place. I like to use my fingers when I think about the distraction of the mind, just this and that and this and that. Oh, I could have done this, should have done that. And one of the things that we're learning to do in this practice is to rest. So like resting in the palm. So instead of the tangential kind of activity of the mind, kind of resting a little bit lower, like in the chest or in the belly, kind of dropping out of the mind, can be really helpful for the agitated, restless person. We often don't know that these are strategies, unskillful strategies, or maybe they were skillful, they were adaptive at one point that have become maladaptive, right? Unfortunately, we reward in this culture the pleasure-seeking, wanting mind, and we really reward the restless, agitated mind. Society rewards it. The calm, peaceful mind doesn't really get rewarded that much, except for in meditation, actually. It's when we flip the script. We're like, oh, awesome. You were able to have a thought and a feeling and not react and just be. That's great. Good for you. Gold star. You're on your way. Right. So agitation, restlessness, the opposite of sleepiness. We get stirred up. Right? The mind is bouncing around, monkey mind, they call it. We have a lot of energy, and it makes us restless. We may think that there's so many other things that we could do. This is common. So the last of the list of hindrances is known as doubt or disbelief. I think of this as what we often will call low self-esteem, or lack of self-worth. This is doubting or disbelieving in your own potential to get better, in your own potential to find that peace and ease. Doubt. Doubt isn't paired with anything because it's involved with everything. So there's no real opposite. There is an opposite of doubt, and it's faith, confidence, inspiration, right? One of the tools that we're developing. So doubt, disbelief, you know, I can't do this. Meditation is not for me. You know, I hear that a lot. You know, I'll talk with people about, yeah, you ever try meditating? You know, it's really helpful to reduce anxiety. Oh yeah, I tried it one time. It's not for me. Yeah. Oh, I just get curious. Like, why is it not for you? And usually they have, you know, a bunch of reasons, but it usually has to do with there's too much agitation and there's a lack of, you know, confidence in meditation's ability or in one's ability to practice meditation. You know, and it's fine. Sometimes people are so agitated, so restless, so uncomfortable that being silent is just not an option. You know, sitting with the discomfort that we've been trying to stay off or numb out from or fall asleep instead of, or stay super distracted and busy. Yeah. Not for me. When I first started meditating, man, it was fucking hard. It was really difficult. I couldn't meditate for more than 10 minutes. I kind of don't even know why I started meditating. Like, I mean, I kind of know, like I was court ordered because I had been violent. I was court ordered to anger management and to see a psychologist. And the psychologist was like kind of a hippie dude. He was totally a hippie dude. But cool hippie, like from New York, you know. He was like a New York hippie, like an art hippie, you know. And he basically taught me how to meditate. He called it self-hypnosis, which interested me. In his wisdom, if he would have called it meditation, I would have been like, yeah, no, not for me. Right. But self-hypnosis, oh, that sounds, I have control of the locus of control of what's happening within me. And if I can learn to hypnotize myself, maybe I can learn to hypnotize other people and get what I want. That was my 16-year-old mind, you know? So I tried it and I did feel and notice some shift that took place where the world got a little quieter externally. And there was a little bit more comfortability, I guess you could say, internally, just a little, just like 3 breaths, you know, but that was different than what I had experienced, not on large amounts of drugs, you know. So that's kind of how I got started. Maybe that's how I got hooked. But then later when I actually like started to meditate regularly, oh, it was super difficult. And then, you know, starting like, okay, I do 10 minutes at a time, you know, set a timer for 10 minutes. I literally had an egg timer when I started meditating. Eventually I went digital, but you know. And then 5-minute increments, you know, start to add 5 minutes, go to a meditation group. And even though I would get these kind of onslaughts of restlessness, agitation, doubt, disbelief, sometimes all in one meditation, right? They call it a multiple hindrance attack, the MHA, multiple hindrance attack, you know, where the mind's off in a fantasy and then there's agitation and then there's sleepiness and then there's doubt all at the same time, you know, right? And yeah, go ahead.
You do when that happens.
Great question. Yeah, great question. The multiple hindrance attack or just any hindrance?
Any and all.
Yeah. The work really first is to see that it's happening. So at some point in the meditation time, like I just kind of gave you guys breath, body, aim, sustain, connect. And then at some point I said, broaden and seeing if are you aware of what's going on? What's the content? Is there pleasure seeking, fantasy, craving in the mind? Is there aversion? Is there some replaying of that fucking person that you're pissed at over and over? Is there some level of doubt or disbelief, fear, sleepiness? So it's kind of turning the concentrated or the mindfulness that's been kind of established. So the awareness, mindful awareness toward what's being experienced. The way the Buddha described it is know when there's a hindrance present in the mind. Know when a hindrance is leaving the mind, and know when a hindrance is not present in the mind. Pretty simple, right? And it seems like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's a little bit more challenging. The challenge to see the hindrances as they arise, it comes over time. Because at first we're just kind of, just like anything else in our life, we're just reacting to experiences, whether we're walking through the world or whether we're just sitting here doing nothing, right? We're reacting to experiences. And then eventually we start to see the experiences are just coming and going, just like the thoughts, just like the breath, just like the sensations in the body. And sometimes, and then how do we skillfully begin to work with them? Well, this is where the antidotes come in. Doubt, fear, faith, confidence. It's the antidote for craving. Well, here, I'll go backwards. So restlessness, agitation, anxiety, concentration is the practice, right? Sloth and torpor, energy is the practice, right? So increasing effort, increasing energy, right? Agitation is it's the busyness, right? Concentration is this one-pointedness, right? So by bringing your attention to one point, like the breath, tip of the nose, like get small, but get just like just the tip of the nose, just stay right there, just in, out, right there. Or down at the belly, at the navel or something like that, right? And just focus on it in a really small area. Also using meta phrases can be really helpful. Or even just saying, like sometimes I use calm, relax, any kind of phrasing. So this is all concentration practice. Walking, step, 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 concentration practice. Helps to reconstitute the mind, bring that agitation down, right? Literally helps to shift from the sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic nervous system. But so anyway, agitation, sleepiness, we were talking about that. Aversion. So aversion, mindfulness is helpful, mindfulness of the aversion, but not getting lost in the thoughts. This is like when you are aware of anger, you're not anger, you're what's aware of anger, right? So in that same way, that's mindfulness. Mindfulness gives us this kind of object subject, where we can kind of hopefully objectively view what we're experiencing without getting locked in it, lost in it. So wanting, craving, pleasure seeking, the antidote for this is wisdom. And a couple different ways that the Buddha talked about this. One is when the Buddha was kind of attacked by these hindrances, This is what we call the battle with Mara, right? When the Buddha was attacked by hindrances, when it became to the pleasure-seeking kind of fantasy craving, what he did is that he used the wisdom gained through the years of practice in seeing the impermanent nature of craving. Craving arises, has a peak, and passes away, just like everything else. He also saw that, like, the way that it's described is that there were like naked, dancing, beautiful maidens that were tempting the Buddha to be, at this point, he hadn't become a Buddha yet. This was his last stand, right? And so what that translates to me is the Buddha was sitting there and he was just overcome with fantasy. I mean, the guy hadn't eaten more than once a day for, a long time. And he hadn't had sex in over 8 to 10 years. So this kind of like the hindrance of the mental affliction of fantasy, of craving. And then what he began to see is, oh, this, like everything else, arises and passes away. And then in the way the story goes is that he began to imagine the food, all of this food that he was going to, be a gluttonous with, began to rot in his mind. Maybe this happened in real life, but I think it was more going on in his mind. Yeah, and fantasizing, and then he began to see it through wisdom's eye, and then he began to see all the beautiful kind of temptresses as becoming older, aging, and then dying, and then their flesh rotting or falling off the body. And so then no longer was it a temptation, right? So this is the application of wisdom, seeing the truth of things. So that's how we begin to do it. So the first is awareness, and then, applying the particular antidote can be helpful. Recognizing when a hindrance is present. Oh, fantasy is alive in me, right? Or fantasy is in the mind, or aversion is in the mind, or doubt. Doubt's a big one. I've worked with doubt a lot. Yeah. And just kind of saying, oh, it's doubt. My worthy adversary, This is like, there's a story in Buddhism, the Milarepa, the cave. Milarepa was a sage, kind of later. This is hundreds of years after the Buddha lived and died. There was, a Tibetan master named Milarepa, and he lived in a cave. And that was his, instead of the Bodhi tree, he went and lived in a cave. And he was confronted with his demons, what he called his demons later on. And at first he was kind of aversive to his demons. Get out of here, fucking demons. We don't want you around here. I'm trying to get free of you. And then they would just come back and get stronger and stronger and stronger. And then he tried to ignore them. And they would just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then eventually he had an awareness of them. And he just said, he invited them in for tea. And he would say, come, demons of, lust or fear or anger, sit beside me. It's okay. You can be here. Subject, object. No longer aversive and no longer being overwhelmed or overcome. Coming along with instead, or coming alongside is another way it's kind of talked about. In different reference, but I'll make it anyway. In Aikido is, this Japanese martial art. One of the best approaches is to enter and blend. Someone comes at you or towards you with aggression, and you enter into that aggressive moment, but you blend. In other words, you're turning to face the same way that they're facing. You're trying to see their perspective. So there's psychological, relational, and self-defense purposes in this kind of term, to enter and blend. But that's what Milarepa basically did. He entered and blended into or with the demons of his own mind. And then they disappeared. They didn't go away right away, just like our hindrances don't go right away. And so this last thing I want to kind of say before I open up for some questions is that this battle with Mara, you know, one would say, oh, I overcame these hindrances, right? I overcame greed, hatred, and delusion. Now, this is what's called freedom from suffering, right? Greed, not present in the mind ever again. Hatred, not present in the mind ever again. Delusion, not present in the mind ever again, right? This is what we call freedom from suffering, nibbana. Now, what do those things get replaced with? Wisdom or faith, loving kindness, compassion, and wisdom. So faith was the first one. Delusion, faith, confidence, seeing clearly, craving, seeing the impermanent nature of things, aversion, ill will, ultimately having an accepting, loving, kind presence with instead of like pushing against, you know. Yeah. All right, I'll open up for any kind of questions, thoughts, comments. Yeah, John.
I feel like in modern times, especially like Western psychology and psychiatry, we have our own way, more sort of forceful way of dealing with illnesses, which is like benzodiazepine, antidepressants, and stimulants.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know, like I wonder from your perspective as somebody that works professionally in psychology, like, do you think that there is like a integrative way of like dovetailing, mindfulness practice with those, like, because I feel like, well, like a common thing that I hear about people that have difficulty with meditation is like, yeah, they feel like they can't focus, right? Or they can't, or there's too much anxiety, right? And so they tend to go towards like this pharmaceutical approach. And I'm wondering, like even in my own experience, like pharmaceuticals in a way, like they actually did sort of make meditation tolerable in a sense, like in the beginning. And I'm wondering what your perspective is. Like my perspective is like, yeah, I'm pretty optimistic, like trying to kind of go all in for mindfulness as this way to eventually get totally sort of away from all of that pharmacology. But like I'm sure that you see a lot more perspectives than I do, and I'm just wondering if you have sort of a more professional opinion about that.
Well, you listed 3 illicit drugs, benzodiazepines, stimulants, and
prescription drugs.
yeah, well, whether it's a prescription or not doesn't mean it gives you a fucking head change, right?
Right.
I mean, ketamine's a prescription now,
Yeah.
right? But what was the third one? Benzodiazepines.
Stimulants or antidepressants or like.
Well, so I think there's a bit of a difference between like let's say antipsychotic medication or antidepressant medication and some anti-anxiety medications. Absolutely, I feel like if it's necessary, and sometimes people are going to use those types of things, and sometimes benzodiazepines can be utilized to reduce anxiety, but they also cause chemical dependency, right? Same thing with stimulants. Stimulants can help with ADHD, but okay, well, let me finish that thought. Stimulants can help with ADHD, and so does meditation. As a matter of fact, as effective as ADHD medication is meditation. Now, what I think you're asking is if someone is taking some kind of medication or some kind of even if they're even if you're using drugs or drinking still or smoking weed on occasion, don't stop meditating. Like using that as a tool to get to a place where it can be more tolerable, but it's a fine line, right? This is why the Buddha, was basically, 2,568 years ago, the Buddha was saying like, yeah, smoking hash or drinking tons of wine and trying to meditate isn't going to help you. So don't do it, because it's just going to cloud your mind. And then any experience that you have is going to be altered. So that being said, I think my harm reduction approach is I'd rather see people meditate high than not meditate at all. Matter of fact, I know lots of people who came to Buddhism or meditation long before they found recovery. Did that answer your question? I mean, I don't know if I went on a tangent.
I guess like what I was getting at more is like, I feel like, if I was talking only to my psychiatrist, right? Like, I don't even really see an end, right? To like the prescription, it's just going to keep coming. But like with the Buddhist practice, I feel like, it's going to taper down and like, and eventually just be replaced with this practice in and of itself, So.
You mean like medication will eventually be tapered down and meditation will kind of replace it?
Well, I think like over the long term, right? Like the actual structural changes that result from a dedicated meditation practice, like presumably they kind of replace the sort of immediate effects of the.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's kind of what I was like wanting to say about the kind of ADHD thing. So, someone's taking whatever, some kind of a stimulant, Vyvanse or Ritalin or whatever. And that helps get them on the cushion and in the room, then it's better than not doing it, I think, with that conversation that you're wanting to have, which is, but there's different, so that conversation of like, I'm going to bring awareness, just like any hindrance, I'm going to bring awareness to what's my relationship to this.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the person prescribing, they're a thoughtful person who's aware of the different risk factors and upsides versus somebody who just,
Yeah, and we're talking about way different things. You know what I mean? We're talking about, are we talking about benzodiazepines versus, versus an antidepressant? Or are we talking Seroquel? That's, maybe a sleep aid, but it's also going to help, seizure and anti-seizure or antipsychotic medication. Yeah. Certain things might be more conducive to meditation than other things, but anyway, I think each person has to kind of figure that out for themselves. And like I was saying before, I do feel like if you're taking a medication and that medication is helping you to be able to sit and sustain without affecting in a negative way other aspects of your life, and continue to take that medication. Thoughts, questions, anything from the room, anything from the Zoom room?
I got one question.
Go ahead.
I'll make it really quick because I know we're basically out of time.
Sorry.
Do you have any suggestions for like trauma sensitive mindfulness, like that could help with that, or how to approach it if you see it?
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think trauma sensitivity, that's like a whole topic. So I'm gonna say maybe I'll cover that on another time. Cool. Because there's no real quick way to answer that.
All right.
So ask me again. Thank you for your time and attention. And please know that any donations that are given to this center go to support the center. And if you want to support me as a teacher, then you can Venmo me at No BS Buddhist, or Jason Murphy on Venmo. And I'd be happy to receive that. I don't ask for any donations, or I mean, I don't ask for any payment. And this is something I do out of the goodness of and I just love it. I appreciate it. I think the Dharma is worthy and priceless. And so to put a price on it, like a yoga class, to me is bastardization. And so I'd much rather just say like, hey, if you feel like supporting me and this center, do so, for your own good and for the benefit of others. And may all the goodness of our practice be dedicated to the freedom from suffering for all beings. May we all be free.